Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. There is a feeling many people carry quietly. The sense that somewhere between effort and outcome, something is missing. Not intelligence, not work ethic. Something in the way the mind is arranged. Science has a name for that arrangement. And it turns out, sleep is the moment it gets rebuilt. Why do some people move through the world and seem to find what they need, while others, working just as hard, walk past the same doors without seeing them open? The answer is not luck. It is a filter. And tonight, the science of that filter will walk with you, fact by fact, into the quiet. And as you settle in now, let that question rest with you, not as pressure, but as an opening. You are already somewhere softer than where the day began. Breathe in, feel the weight of the blanket. Let the night begin its quiet work. You have probably noticed that after deciding to buy a particular car, that exact car suddenly appeared everywhere on the road. They were always there. What changed was your brain's internal filter, a structure called the Reticular Activating System, or RAS. Neuroscientists describe the RAS as a network of neurons in the brainstem that acts as the brain's relevance gatekeeper. It scans incoming sensory data, millions of signals per second, and decides, based on what you have recently prioritized, what gets elevated into conscious awareness and what disappears. The car was always there. The filter just wasn't tuned to see it. And that is only the beginning of what the RAS reveals about the way opportunity and the feeling of missing it actually works. There is a reason some mornings you wake up already worried, the night before, and without realizing it. Your brain was reviewing the day's unresolved emotional content, and the RAS was taking notes. Research published in the journal Neuropsychologia has documented that the RAS receives direct input from limbic structures, including the amygdala, the brain's emotional priority system. When you go to sleep holding anxiety, the amygdala marks that emotional state as high relevance. The RAS then surfaces stimuli the following day that match that emotional signature, not because the world became more threatening, but because the filter was set to threat detection overnight. What you wake up looking for is, in part, what you fell asleep feeling. The RAS does not operate on logic alone. It responds to repetition and emotional charge. Studies from the University of California have shown that thoughts rehearsed with emotional intensity in the pre-sleep window are significantly more likely to be consolidated into procedural memory, the kind of memory that shapes automatic behavior. This is why athletes visualize performance before sleep, and why therapists have long observed that the emotional tone of a patient's evening reflects in their morning perception. The brain is not passive during this window. It is actively deciding, based on what you brought to it, what lens to use tomorrow. The filter is not fixed. It is updated nightly. Before you ever consciously notice an opportunity, your RAS has already made a decision about it. Neuroimaging research has shown that the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with goal-directed thinking, sends top-down signals to the RAS that shape what gets filtered in. When a goal has been sufficiently rehearsed and emotionally reinforced, the prefrontal cortex essentially pre-tags related stimuli as important. This means that when a relevant conversation, a door, a person, an offer appears in the environment, the RAS flags it for conscious attention before you have actively searched for it. The experience of noticing an opportunity is, neurologically, the end of a process, not the beginning. What you feel as a lucky moment was filtered in, not stumbled upon. The concept of mental bandwidth has a physiological basis. The RAS must make filtering decisions under severe resource constraints. The brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's total energy, and the cost of bringing each additional signal into consciousness is real. Research published in Nature Reviews Neuroscience has described the RAS as functioning like a priority queue. When the queue is dominated by survival concerns, threat-related stimuli, and unresolved stress, signals related to opportunity, connection, and novelty are systematically deprioritized. The feeling that you are missing something, that others are living in a more abundant version of the same world, may be the experience of a filter set to the wrong priority queue. Sleep is one of the few times that queue gets reorganized. During the deepest stages of non-REM sleep, the brain undergoes a process of synaptic downscaling, a quiet, essential pruning of neural connections that accumulated during the day. Research from the University of Wisconsin, published in Science, showed that sleep deprivation prevents this downscaling, leaving the brain in a state of neural noise. Too many connections, weighted equally, making filtering difficult. When the brain is rested, the signal-to-noise ratio improves. The RAS can distinguish between background noise and relevant information more precisely. Sleep deprivation does not just make you tired, it makes the filter coarser, less selective, less able to surface what matters from what doesn't. There is a specific pre-sleep phenomenon that researchers call the hypnagogic state, the transition period between wakefulness and sleep, typically lasting between 5 and 20 minutes. During this window, EEG recordings show a unique brain state. Theta waves predominate, and the default mode network, associated with self-referential thought and future planning, becomes highly active. Psychologist Andreas Mavromatis, who studied hypnagogia extensively, documented that this state is associated with unusual associative thinking, spontaneous insight, and the loosening of habitual cognitive patterns. What you allow to occupy this window: worry, rehearsal, intention, gratitude, has disproportionate access to the consolidation processes that follow. The hypnagogic state is not just the mind winding down, it is the editorial window. Goal-setting literature has long described the power of writing down specific intentions before sleep. But the neuroscience behind this practice has only recently been mapped. Research from Baylor University, published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, found that participants who wrote a specific to-do list before sleep, not a worry list, but a concrete list of what they intended to accomplish, fell asleep faster and reported higher sleep quality. The researchers concluded that externalizing intention offloads the cognitive monitoring burden the RAS would otherwise maintain overnight. When the brain trusts that an intention has been recorded, it can release the low-level alertness associated with open loops. The filter is freed to reset. Financial stress specifically disrupts the RAS in measurable ways. A study published in Science by Shah, Malai Nathan, and Shafir. Findings later expanded in the book Scarcity, demonstrated that individuals under financial pressure experience what researchers termed bandwidth tax. The cognitive load of managing scarcity consumes working memory and attentional resources, effectively narrowing the field of perception. People under financial stress in the study performed significantly worse on tasks requiring flexible thinking, not because of lower intelligence, but because their attentional filter was preoccupied. The feeling that you cannot think clearly when money is tight is not a personal failing. It is the documented cost of a filter overwhelmed by urgency. The RAS is trainable. This is perhaps the most practically significant finding in this body of research. Studies on neuroplasticity, including work from the lab of neuroscientist Michael Merzenich at the University of California, San Francisco, have documented that repeated, emotionally salient mental rehearsal produces measurable changes in neural circuitry over periods as short as 3 to 4 weeks. The RAS filters based on what the brain has been consistently exposed to and what has been emotionally reinforced. This means that what you rehearse in the pre-sleep window, not just once, but repeatedly, gradually recalibrates what the filter surfaces. And this is only the beginning of what the Reticular Activating System reveals about the way opportunity and the experience of abundance actually work. The amygdala and the RAS share one of the most well-documented feedback loops in affective neuroscience. The amygdala assigns emotional salience to incoming stimuli, essentially flagging how much a piece of information matters emotionally, and transmits that rating to the RAS, which uses it to determine filtering priority. What is particularly significant for understanding the experience of financial stress is that the amygdala does not distinguish between perceived threats and actual ones. Research from New York University's Emotional Brain Institute has shown that imagined financial scarcity activates the amygdala at nearly the same intensity as real scarcity. The filter is shaped not only by what is happening, but by what the brain has been rehearsing might happen. Sleep research has identified what is called offline consolidation, the process by which experiences and information encountered during the day are transferred from short-term hippocampal storage into longer-term cortical networks during sleep. A key finding from Harvard Medical School's sleep division is that emotionally tagged memories receive preferential treatment during this consolidation process. The brain essentially says, "This felt important," so we keep it closer to the surface. This means that whatever emotional frame was active in the pre-sleep window, scarcity or abundance, threat or opportunity, is literally given structural priority in the next day's operating memory. How you go to sleep shapes what you wake up with. There is a concept in cognitive neuroscience called attentional set, the configuration of the brain's filtering system at any given moment, which determines what category of stimuli is most likely to be noticed. Attentional set is not random. Research published in Psychological Science has shown that attentional set is highly malleable and can be shifted by brief but emotionally engaging exposures in the minutes before a task. Applied to the pre-sleep window, this suggests that even a short, intentional mental rehearsal of abundance rather than scarcity, of available resources rather than missing ones, can meaningfully shift the attentional configuration that the RAS carries into the following day. The default mode network, a set of interconnected brain regions most active during rest, self-reflection, and future simulation, is now understood to be one of the primary mechanisms through which the RAS receives its long-term filtering instructions. Research from Washington University in St. Anne, Lewis has shown that the default mode network is responsible for constructing the brain's internal model of what I am, what I need, and what matters. This self-model is updated during sleep. Disruptions to sleep, particularly to REM sleep, when the default mode network is most active, result in a self-model that is less current and more likely to reflect old patterns of thought rather than recently rehearsed intentions. Neuroscientist Tali Sharot, in her research on the optimism bias at University College London, has documented that the human brain has a measurable tendency to update its predictions more readily with positive information than negative information, under certain conditions. Specifically, when the prefrontal cortex is adequately resourced, that is, when the person is rested and not under acute stress. The brain's predictive systems show greater plasticity in the positive direction. Sleep restores the prefrontal cortex's regulatory function. This means that the brain's capacity to update its filter toward optimism is, in part, a function of sleep quality. The well-rested mind is literally more capable of revising its assumptions upward. Goal priming, the practice of activating goal-related concepts in memory just before a period of rest or reduced conscious attention, has been studied extensively in social psychology. Research from the University of Amsterdam, and later replicated by researchers at Princeton, has shown that activating a goal concept increases the likelihood of that goal-relevant behavior occurring spontaneously in the following hours. Without conscious instruction, the mechanism is the RAS. When a goal concept has been recently activated and emotionally reinforced, the RAS remains primed to surface stimuli related to it. Deliberate goal priming before sleep is not motivational folklore. It is a documented influence on filtering behavior. One of the most counterintuitive findings in sleep and cognition research involves the timing of insight. Studies from the University of Lübeck in Germany, published in Nature, demonstrated that participants who slept between learning a problem and attempting to solve it were 2 to 3 times more likely to discover a hidden rule or shortcut than participants who remained awake during the same interval. The sleeping brain was not idle. It was quietly reorganizing, drawing connections across remote memory stores, and preparing insight for delivery. The moment of clarity that arrives after sleeping on a problem is not metaphor. It is the RAS surfacing what offline processing assembled overnight. The glymphatic system, a waste clearance network in the brain that operates primarily during sleep, is understood to play a potential role in cognitive clarity and perceptual acuity. Research from the University of Rochester, led by Maiken Nedergaard and published in Science in 2013, demonstrated in animal models that the glymphatic system is nearly 10 times more active during sleep than wakefulness, clearing metabolic byproducts that accumulate during the day. While human evidence for the full glymphatic cycle remains an active research area, Disrupted sleep is consistently associated with greater cognitive noise. A brain carrying metabolic clutter processes incoming signals with less precision. The filter becomes less reliable. There is a little-known form of memory called prospective memory. The memory not of what has happened, but of what you have intended to do. Research published in Psychological Review has documented that prospective memory is maintained by a monitoring process that runs continuously in the background of working memory. When this monitoring process is active for too many open intentions, too many things you have told yourself you will do but haven't done, it consumes attentional resources continuously. The experience of mental fatigue that comes from a long, unresolved to-do list is, in part, the cost of carrying too many active prospective memories. Sleep, particularly when preceded by intentional closure of open loops, allows this monitoring process to rest. Research into the neuroscience of self-efficacy, the belief in one's own capacity to produce a specific outcome, has shown that self-efficacy beliefs are stored and updated using the same memory consolidation mechanisms that govern skill acquisition. Studies from Stanford's Social Neuroscience Laboratory have documented that self-efficacy beliefs are not abstract attitudes, but encoded patterns of neural activation subject to the same rehearsal and consolidation dynamics as any other learned behavior. This means that repeatedly rehearsing the belief that you are capable of recognizing and acting on opportunities, particularly in the emotionally receptive pre-sleep state, is not superficial positive thinking. It is working with the brain's actual consolidation machinery. The brain's reward circuitry, centered on the mesolimbic dopamine system, plays a direct role in filtering. Dopamine neurons in the ventral tegmental area project to the prefrontal cortex and help determine what the prefrontal cortex considers worth attending to. Research has shown that dopamine release associated with goal pursuit, the anticipation of reward, not just its receipt, specifically activates prefrontal RAS pathways that increase attentiveness to goal-relevant stimuli. In practical terms, this means that orienting toward desired outcomes and experiencing even a small anticipatory response directly increases the probability that the RAS will surface related opportunities. Desire, in a neurochemical sense, opens the filter. Sleep architecture. The structure of sleep stages across a night follows a predictable pattern with specific implications for what mental material gets processed at each phase. Early sleep cycles are dominated by slow-wave, non-REM sleep, during which semantic memory consolidation and procedural learning predominate. Later cycles, typically in the final 2 to 3 hours before waking, are dominated by REM sleep, associated with emotional memory processing and creative association. The quality of REM sleep specifically affects emotional regulation the following day and the flexibility of associative thinking. Waking too early, as people under stress often do, cuts off the REM-rich final cycles and disrupts both emotional equilibrium and the creative associativity needed to recognize novel solutions. The concept of implementation intentions, first formalized by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer at NYU, describes the practice of mentally linking a future situation to a specific response. When I encounter X, I will do Y. Research on implementation intentions has consistently shown that this type of pre-commitment to behavior dramatically increases follow-through, with effect sizes substantially larger than simple goal setting alone. The neurological basis is well established. By pre-encoding a situation response link, the individual effectively delegates the monitoring task from effortful conscious attention to automatic RAS triggering. When situation X occurs, the RAS flags it without requiring deliberate search. Specificity of intention, rehearsed before sleep, programs the filter for automatic recognition. There is growing research into what is called sleep-dependent emotional memory thinning, a process by which the emotional intensity of a memory is reduced during sleep while its informational content is preserved. Research from Matthew Walker's group at UC Berkeley suggests that REM sleep specifically serves to reduce the emotional charge carried by difficult experiences, allowing the memory to be accessed without re-triggering the original distress. In the context of financial anxiety, this process is significant. The facts of the situation may remain the same after a good night of sleep, but the visceral threat response can diminish, allowing the prefrontal cortex to re-engage with the problem more strategically. Sleep does not solve the problem. It changes who is in charge of thinking about it. What these 25 facts, taken together, suggest does not quite fit the usual framing of success or opportunity. They suggest that the difference between a person who sees opportunity and one who does not is, at the neural level, largely a difference of filter configuration, and that configuration is not fixed. It is updated every night. The brain does not simply rest during sleep. It files, weighs, consolidates, and recalibrates. What it recalibrates toward depends on what it was given in the pre-sleep window. That experience of walking through the world feeling like you are missing what others can see, that is a filter problem, and filters can change. The next arc begins with how. Rest here for a moment. You have just learned that the experience of not seeing opportunity, that quiet, frustrating gap between what you want and what seems to arrive, is not a character flaw. It is a filter. And that filter was built over time, from everything you brought to the moments before sleep. There is something almost tender about that. Your brain was not failing you. It was doing exactly what you asked it to do, protecting you, prioritizing what seemed most urgent, filtering everything else away. Tonight, something is beginning to change. Not in the world outside, but in the lens. In the next section, the science will move deeper into exactly how that filter learns and what it is actually capable of. Let that land gently. Just let the facts continue, and let the night do what the night does best. The RAS is not a passive receiver. It is an active predictor. Contemporary neuroscience has moved decisively toward understanding the brain as a prediction machine rather than a stimulus-response organ. Research by Carl Friston at University College London, developed into a framework called predictive processing, proposes that the brain continuously generates models of what it expects to perceive and only updates those models when incoming data diverges from prediction. What this means practically is that a brain whose model predicts scarcity will actively filter in evidence of scarcity, not out of negativity, but out of efficient prediction confirmation. Changing the filter requires updating the predictive model, and that update happens primarily during sleep. The concept of schema in cognitive psychology describes the organized mental frameworks that the brain uses to interpret incoming experience. Research by Frederick Bartlett, and later expanded by cognitive neuroscientists, has shown that schemas function as templates. When new information arrives, it is assimilated into existing schemas, and details that do not fit are frequently distorted or dropped. A person whose schema of their financial situation is structured around scarcity will routinely filter out information that does not fit, not deliberately, but as a natural property of schema-based processing. Sleep consolidation reinforces existing schemas unless the pre-sleep content actively introduces material that challenges them. The schema is what the RAS is protecting. One of the most significant advances in understanding how the brain changes its filtering patterns comes from research into memory reconsolidation, first demonstrated systematically by Karim Nader at McGill University. Reconsolidation research showed that when a stored memory is reactivated, brought briefly back into conscious awareness, it temporarily becomes unstable and susceptible to modification before being restored. This means that old schemas and beliefs are not permanently fixed in neural hardware. They can be updated when reactivated in the right context. The pre-sleep window, during which memories from the day are spontaneously reviewed, is a naturally occurring reconsolidation window, one where a new frame can modify how an old experience is stored. Research into goal contagion, the phenomenon by which exposure to another person's goal pursuit activates similar goal representations in the observer, has shown that the brain automatically simulates the goals of others it observes, and that this simulation can influence the observer's own goal-directed behavior. Studies from the University of Würzburg have documented that individuals exposed to someone pursuing financial success subsequently showed increased attentional bias toward opportunity cues in the environment, without conscious awareness of the influence. The implication is that the social and informational environment in the pre-sleep period, what you read, watch, listen to, or discuss, is not neutral. It shapes the goal representations the RAS carries into the next day. The hippocampus, the brain's primary structure for encoding new memories, plays a crucial role in the initial tagging of experiences as goal-relevant. Research from University College London's Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience has shown that the hippocampus is particularly active during the encoding of events that occur near a goal-relevant context, functioning as the brain's "this matters to my goals" flagging system. During sleep, the hippocampus replays the day's experiences in compressed form, a process called sharp wave ripple replay, and transmits flagged memories to the neocortex for long-term storage. What gets flagged, and therefore replayed and stored, is influenced by what was emotionally and intentionally primed in the hours before sleep. Research from the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences has examined what happens to the brain's reward response when individuals shift from a scarcity mindset to what researchers describe as a resource frame, a mental orientation that perceives the same environment as containing available tools and connections rather than limitations. Neuroimaging data showed that the resource frame activated the ventral striatum, a reward processing region, in response to neutral stimuli that the scarcity frame had left unactivated. The same neutral environment literally registered as more rewarding under the resource frame. What the RAS is tuned to find shapes not just what is noticed, but what is experienced as good. The brain's anterior cingulate cortex, a region associated with conflict monitoring, error detection, and the allocation of attentional resources, has been shown to modulate RAS activity based on motivational state. When the anterior cingulate detects a mismatch between current state and a desired goal, it increases attentional resources directed toward goal-relevant stimuli. This is one reason why clearly defined, emotionally meaningful goals increase perceptual acuity. The anterior cingulate is running a continuous background comparison between where you are and where you want to be, routing attentional priority accordingly. Sleep reorganizes this comparison system, resetting the baseline and allowing the morning's comparison to begin from a clearer starting point. Research into the phenomenon of incubation in creative problem-solving, the period of apparent non-thinking between initial effort and breakthrough, has consistently shown that this period is not passive. Studies using neuroimaging have shown that during incubation, the default mode network remains highly active, and spontaneous associations between previously unconnected concepts occur at an elevated rate. Sleep-based incubation, the overnight period between encountering a problem and waking with new perspective, has been documented as one of the most powerful forms. The sleeping brain draws connections across memory stores that the awake, focused brain is too narrowly engaged to traverse. What feels like doing nothing is often when the most relevant connections form. The relationship between language and perception is more direct than most people realize. Research in psycholinguistics has shown that the words used habitually to describe one's situation actively shape the perceptual categories the brain uses to organize experience. Studies using both behavioral and neuroimaging methods have documented that language changes the activation of perceptual regions, literally influencing what is seen. People who habitually describe their financial situation using language of constraint show measurably different attentional patterns than those who describe the same objective situation using language of current limitation and future possibility. The RAS is, in part, a linguistic system. It learns what to look for from the narrative the mind rehearses. Research from the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center, led by Martin Seligman, has documented what is called explanatory style, the habitual way a person explains the causes of events to themselves. Individuals with a pessimistic explanatory style, attributing negative events to permanent, pervasive, and personal causes, show measurably different attentional patterns and different RAS filtering than those with optimistic explanatory styles. Crucially, explanatory style is not fixed personality. It is a learned cognitive habit. Research interventions that systematically practice alternative explanatory framing have produced durable changes in attentional bias. Explanatory style is one of the most accessible levers for recalibrating the filter. There is a body of research in sleep science examining what is called targeted memory reactivation, the practice of playing specific sensory cues during slow-wave sleep to strengthen the consolidation of particular memories. Research published in Science by Ken Paller's group at Northwestern University demonstrated that participants exposed to subtle auditory cues associated with learned material during sleep showed significantly stronger retention of that material the following morning. The implication extends beyond memory enhancement. If sensory cues can selectively strengthen specific memories during sleep, the brain's consolidation process is far more accessible to intentional influence than previously assumed. Sleep is not a black box. It is a process that responds to what you bring to it. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, goal-directed behavior, and the regulation of the amygdala, is disproportionately vulnerable to sleep deprivation. Research from the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research documented that even modest, chronic sleep restriction of 6 hours per night over 2 weeks produces cognitive impairment equivalent to 2 full nights of total sleep deprivation, while subjects' subjective sense of impairment does not keep pace. The prefrontal cortex's capacity to regulate emotional reactivity, maintain goal focus, and override habitual filtering patterns is specifically what erodes under sleep debt. This is why financial stress, which often disrupts sleep, tends to create a cognitive environment in which escape from the stress feels increasingly out of reach. Research into emotional valence bias in memory encoding, the tendency of the brain to prioritize emotionally charged information during encoding, has shown that this bias is not symmetric. Studies from New York University have shown that under high-stress conditions, the amygdala shows a specific enhancement of negative valence encoding relative to positive valence encoding. This means that a stressed brain does not just remember things more vividly. It remembers difficult news more vividly than good news, and filters in threat-related information more readily than opportunity-related information. Sleep, particularly adequate REM sleep, has been shown to partially correct this asymmetry, allowing the following day's encoding to begin with more balanced emotional sensitivity. Research from the field of behavioral economics has documented what is called opportunity cost neglect, the tendency to fail to consider what is foregone when making a choice, particularly under cognitive load. The RAS is relevant here. A filter dominated by scarcity signals is simultaneously a filter depleted of attentional resources available for opportunity recognition. The experience of missing opportunities is not always about failing to look. It is sometimes about having insufficient bandwidth to process what is in plain view. Sleep restores attentional bandwidth. The well-rested morning, following an evening of intentional pre-sleep priming, is, neurologically, the most resource-rich environment available for opportunity recognition. The gap between the world a person believes they are in and the world that contains available resources is, in large part, a gap maintained by the filter. Research across cognitive psychology, affective neuroscience, and sleep science converges on a finding that carries quiet relief. The world does not need to change for more of it to become visible. The filter needs to change. And the filter changes through sleep, through rehearsal, through the stories told in the pre-sleep window. The question that began tonight is becoming, by this point, a question with an answer that feels less like luck and more like mechanism, a mechanism already running in you. Every night. There is something happening right now, beneath the surface of waking. your brain is already beginning the filtration process for tomorrow. The RAS is listening. What you let settle into the quiet of this hour will shape what opens to you in the morning. So stay here a little longer. The facts keep walking with you. The concept of semantic priming, the phenomenon by which exposure to one concept automatically increases the accessibility of related concepts in memory, has direct application to understanding how the filter can be broadened. Research in cognitive psychology has shown that semantic priming operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, with measurable effect on subsequent perception and behavior. The neural pathway involved runs directly through the hippocampus and into prefrontal RAS circuits. When abundance-related concepts are activated in memory, through deliberate reading, reflection, or conversation before sleep, they lower the activation threshold for semantically related concepts the following day. Priming does not require belief. It requires repetition and proximity to the consolidation window. Research from the field of positive neuroplasticity, developed extensively by neuropsychologist Rick Hanson, has described what Hanson calls the negativity bias as a feature of an evolved brain that, in modern environments, systematically underweights positive experience during encoding. The brain tends to bind negative experiences readily, while positive experiences require deliberate, prolonged attention to encode with comparable strength. The practical implication is that briefly noticing a positive experience is insufficient for altering the filter. Extended, embodied attention to positive experience, particularly in the pre-sleep window, is needed to give it comparable consolidation weight. The filter learns from what the mind holds longest, not merely what it touches. Lucid dreaming research has produced an unexpected finding about the RAS. The same neural signature that enables a dreamer to recognize they are dreaming, a characteristic burst of gamma wave activity in the prefrontal cortex, is also active during waking moments of sudden clarity. Research from the Neurological Hospital in Frankfurt, published in Nature Neuroscience, documented this gamma signature in REM sleep lucidity. The broader implication is that the prefrontal cortex's capacity for meta-awareness, the ability to step outside one's current filter and observe it, is a trainable cognitive skill. Individuals who practice this meta-awareness during waking hours show altered morning attentional patterns. The filter can be observed, and what can be observed can be changed. Research on implementation, intention transfer, whether the behavioral priming effect of pre-committing to a response extends across a sleep period, has shown that it does, and in some conditions is strengthened by sleep. Studies from the University of Edinburgh have shown that implementation intentions formed before sleep produced higher follow-through rates than those formed on the morning of a task. The sleep period appeared to consolidate the situation-response link, making the automatic RAS triggering more reliable. The old practice of deciding, before sleep, what you will do and notice tomorrow is not merely motivational ritual. It has a documented, sleep-supported mechanism behind it. Research into the phenomenology of flow states, the condition of effortless, absorbed performance first described systematically by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, has shown that flow is associated with a specific pattern of neural deactivation in the prefrontal cortex, combined with heightened subcortical activity. During flow, the effortful, self-monitoring aspects of conscious attention, quiet, while automatic processing, including RAS-mediated attentional guidance, becomes dominant. What is notable is that flow states are significantly more accessible when the brain enters the day well-rested and with clear goal orientation. The conditions that allow the filter to operate fluidly, rather than effortfully and narrowly, are precisely the conditions that restful, intentional sleep creates. There is a concept in social psychology called self-concept clarity, the degree to which an individual holds clear, consistent, and stable beliefs about who they are. Research by Jennifer Campbell at the University of British Columbia has shown that self-concept clarity predicts psychological well-being more robustly than self-esteem alone, and is associated with lower reactivity to stress and higher capacity for goal-directed behavior. Self-concept clarity is, in the context of the RAS, the specification of what the filter is supposed to be looking for. Vague or inconsistent self-concept leads to an unfocused filter, scanning broadly but surfacing little with precision. Clear identity intention, rehearsed before sleep, narrows and sharpens the filter toward what is actually sought. Research from the field of chronobiology has documented that the brain's capacity for learning and memory encoding fluctuates across the day in predictable ways, tied to the circadian rhythm. Studies from the Salk Institute have shown that there are specific windows of heightened hippocampal plasticity, periods when new information is more likely to be durably encoded. These windows, in most adults, occur in the late morning and late afternoon, the pre-sleep window. While not a peak encoding time for new information, is a peak window for the consolidation and emotional processing of what has already been encountered. The right information at the right window is a circadian reality. Research into construal level theory, developed by Yakov Trope and Nira Liberman, has shown that mental distance, including temporal distance, changes how the brain represents goals and opportunities. Abstract. Future-oriented goals activate the prefrontal cortex and long-range goal tracking systems connected to the RAS, while immediate, concrete concerns activate more local, reactive circuits. The practical implication is that spending time in the pre-sleep window, mentally inhabiting a future self, one who has already navigated the current constraint, creates a construal that activates the prefrontal RAS pathways associated with long-range opportunity tracking. The filter can be temporarily set to a future specification and begins scanning for what that future requires today. Research into neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, in the adult hippocampus remains a scientifically contested area, with strong evidence from animal models and more limited but emerging evidence in humans. What is more clearly established is that sleep, physical activity, and the reduction of chronic stress are consistently associated with hippocampal structural health across species. The hippocampus is the brain's primary novelty detector and initial gateway for new associative learning. Its health directly affects the brain's capacity to update old patterns, including old filtering patterns. Whatever supports the hippocampus supports the brain's capacity for filter revision, Sleep is among the most evidence-supported hippocampal supports available. The arc of these 50 facts points towards something that may feel counterintuitive from the outside, but increasingly self-evident from the inside. The experience of financial pressure as a permanent condition, as something that reflects who you are, rather than how your filter is configured, is a story the brain tells itself when the filter is overwhelmed. Not a moral failing, not a fixed trait. A filter under load, producing a predictable experience of limitation. The science has spent 50 facts building toward a simple revision. The resources were never the problem. The filter was, and the most powerful window for changing it comes every night. Unbidden, quiet, and waiting. That is where the second half lives. Let that settle for a moment. 50 facts. And the thread running through all of them is the same. That what you have been experiencing as a personal inadequacy, the not seeing, the not finding, the sense of moving through a world that yields its opportunities to everyone but you, is a neuroscientific phenomenon, a real, documented, alterable process. Feel where that lands in your body right now. Not in your thoughts, in your body. Is there something in your chest that is a little less tight, something in your shoulders that has shifted slightly? That is what a filter changing feels like, before the brain has caught up to it. The next section moves into what the research shows about how the brain rebuilds its operating model. One night, one pre-sleep window, one morning at a time. Let your body stay where it is. Let the facts continue. The brain does not update its filtering model all at once. Research on habit formation and neural plasticity consistently shows that durable cognitive change accumulates through repetition across multiple consolidation cycles. A study by Philippa Lally and colleagues at University College London, published in the European Journal of Social Psychology, documented that new behavioral patterns required an average of 66 repetitions, not 21, as the popular formulation suggests, to reach the threshold of automaticity. This applies to attentional habits as directly as behavioral ones. Recalibrating the RAS toward opportunity recognition is not a single night's work. It is a direction of travel that compounds, each sleep cycle deepening the neural trace. Research on the sleep-dependent consolidation of insight has shown that the benefits of sleeping on a problem are not purely about rest. They are about the process of offline associative integration. Studies from UC San Diego documented that participants who napped between learning tasks showed not only better memory for learned material, but improved capacity for drawing novel connections across different areas of knowledge. The sleeping brain is a synthesizer. It draws lines between things that waking attention, focused on a single thread, cannot connect. The new way of seeing a situation that emerges from sleep is not inspiration. It is the brain's most sophisticated processing capacity, freed from the constraints of waking attention. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, running from the brainstem through the heart and abdomen, has been increasingly understood to play a role in regulating the brain's threat detection and filtering systems. Research by Stephen Porges, whose work on polyvagal theory has influenced both clinical and neuroscience contexts, suggests that the state of the autonomic nervous system influences how the RAS prioritizes emotional salience Note that polyvagal theory remains an evolving framework, and some specific claims are debated in the literature. What is more clearly established is that chronic sympathetic activation narrows the scope of attention, sleep, by facilitating parasympathetic recovery, allows the attentional scope to expand. Studies on the neuroscience of gratitude, using both self-report and neuroimaging methods, have documented that the deliberate practice of identifying positive experiences activates the medial prefrontal cortex and ventral striatum, regions associated with reward processing and self-referential positive updating. Research from the University of Southern California found that grateful individuals showed altered neural responses to prosocial stimuli and different activity in brain regions associated with moral cognition. The relevance to RAS calibration is specific. Gratitude practice, when engaged sincerely and repeatedly in the pre-sleep window, provides the emotional salience signal the brain uses to determine what to filter in. Gratitude is a filter adjustment. Research on counterfactual thinking, the mental simulation of alternative outcomes, has shown that this cognitive process activates many of the same neural circuits as actual planning. Studies published in Psychological Science have shown that upward counterfactual thinking, imagining how a situation could have gone better, activates goal pursuit circuits and primes the brain for more effective subsequent behavior. Downward counterfactual thinking, imagining how things could be worse, produces a different emotional response, but does not activate the same goal pursuit priming. The direction of counterfactual rehearsal before sleep, toward what could be, rather than what was, uses the brain's simulation machinery in the service of filter recalibration. Research from the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics has documented that regular engagement with beautiful experiences, art, music, nature, architecture, produces measurable changes in default mode network activity and in the brain's baseline levels of aesthetic sensitivity. The neural circuits trained by sustained attention to beauty are the same circuits involved in noticing fine-grained detail, sustaining open attention, and recognizing pattern in apparent randomness. A brain trained to find beauty in ordinary experiences, structurally, a brain with a broader attentional aperture. What it is trained to notice with pleasure, it notices more readily. In all domains, including the domain of available opportunity. The field of positive psychology has documented what Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina calls the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. According to Fredrickson's research, positive emotional states produce a measurable broadening of the perceptual field, a widening of attentional scope that increases the likelihood of noticing peripheral information, drawing novel connections, and seeing options that a narrowed, negative emotional state would filter out. The mechanisms, documented in both behavioral and neuroimaging studies, involve reduced amygdala activation and increased prefrontal engagement, building positive emotional states, not as a denial of difficulty but as a deliberate neural resource, directly expands the filter's aperture. Research on the relationship between social connection and cognitive performance has documented that loneliness and social isolation produce measurable increases in threat surveillance activity. A state of heightened vigilance to potential social rejection that consumes attentional bandwidth continuously. Studies from Brigham Young University and the University of Chicago have shown that lonely individuals show altered attentional bias toward threatening social cues and reduced capacity for flexible, exploratory thinking. Connection is not merely an emotional need. It is a cognitive resource. Experiences of genuine connection in the evening, followed by consolidating sleep, reduce the threat load on the filter and free more bandwidth for opportunity recognition the following day. Research on implementation mindset. The mental state associated with concretely planning how to achieve a goal, distinct from deliberating whether to pursue it, has documented measurably different attentional profiles in each state. Studies by Peter Gollwitzer and colleagues have shown that people in an implementation mindset show narrowed attentional focus on goal-relevant information and greater confidence in goal pursuit, deliberately shifting into an implementation mindset before sleep. By concretely imagining specific actions of the next day, rather than ruminating on the goal's desirability, provides the RAS with operational parameters. The filter receives a task, not just a wish. Research on self-affirmation. The practice of reflecting on personally important values has shown that it produces a specific neural effect, temporary reduction in the brain's response to self-threatening information. Studies from Carnegie Mellon University, published in Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience, demonstrated that self-affirmation before a threat-inducing task reduced cortisol response and increased activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region associated with self-processing and value representation. The mechanism is not that the threat disappears. It is that the self's resource evaluation expands. The RAS, calibrated by an expanded sense of personal resource, scans with a different sensitivity than one calibrated by a diminished sense of self. The experience of learned helplessness, first documented by Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer in animal experiments and extensively replicated in human studies, describes what happens to the brain's goal pursuit circuitry after repeated exposure to uncontrollable negative outcomes. When outcomes consistently fail to respond to actions, the prefrontal goal tracking systems disengage. The behavioral result is passivity, not laziness, but a brain that has updated its model to predict that action and outcome are uncorrelated. Subsequent research showed this neurological signature can be reversed by the experience of controllable positive outcomes, even small ones, reliably delivered. The first step is not a big win. It is a reliable small one. Research on behavioral activation, the practice of deliberately increasing engagement with rewarding activities during periods of low mood or motivation, has documented measurable increases in dopaminergic activity and improved attentional functioning over 2 to 4 weeks. The mechanism is partly RAS-based. Increased reward activity recalibrates the brain's evaluation of what is worth attending to. Filter recalibration does not require a changed belief or positive mood to begin. It requires changed behavior. Small, consistent engagement with activities the brain registers as rewarding, and the neurochemical environment follows. The filter updates in response to behavior, not the other way around. Studies on the neurological underpinnings of resilience have identified a specific neural signature in individuals who demonstrate high resilience. sustained activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and rapid amygdala recovery following stress. Research from Richard Davidson's lab at the University of Wisconsin documented this pattern in long-term meditators and in individuals who underwent structured positive reappraisal training. Resilience is not a trait one either has or lacks. It is a pattern of neural coordination that can be cultivated. Sleep supports resilience not as passive rest, but as active reinforcement of the neural patterns most recently exercised. What gets practiced before sleep gets reinforced overnight. The neurological basis of hope, as distinct from optimism and closely related to goal-directed behavior, has been examined in research by C.R. Snyder at the University of Kansas, whose hope theory describes hope as consisting of pathways thinking and agency thinking. Neuroimaging work has shown that pathways thinking activates dorsolateral prefrontal circuits associated with planning, while agency thinking activates ventromedial circuits associated with self-evaluation and reward. Both are modifiable through practice. The pre-sleep window, when the brain moves toward reduced executive control and increased associative processing, may be a particularly receptive time for generating and emotionally anchoring new pathways, new routes from here to there. Research on the neuroplasticity of attention itself, as distinct from the content of what attention is directed toward, has shown that the capacity for sustained, open, flexible attention is trainable through specific practices. Studies of mindfulness meditation from labs at Harvard, Oxford, and the Max Planck Institute have documented structural changes in the anterior cingulate cortex and insula in long-term practitioners, corresponding to enhanced attentional regulation. These structural changes are associated with measurably different filtering profiles, less automatic capture by threat-related stimuli, greater capacity for open, exploratory attention. Training the attentional system is training the RAS substrate, and training compounds with sleep. Research examining the relationship between sleep quality and financial decision-making has produced a direct link. A study from Carnegie Mellon University found that individuals who had slept fewer than 6 hours made riskier financial decisions, showed greater sensitivity to immediate losses, and demonstrated reduced capacity for considering long-term consequences. The prefrontal cortex's contribution to considered, future-oriented financial judgment, the capacity to see the long game, weigh options, resist the urgency of scarcity, is specifically what sleep deprivation degrades. The financial thinking available to a well-rested brain and the financial thinking available to a depleted brain are measurably different tools. There is a concept in organizational psychology called psychological safety. The belief that one can take risks without facing punishment or humiliation. Research by Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School has documented that psychological safety is one of the most powerful predictors of learning and performance. At the individual level, the neurological analog is the prefrontal amygdala balance. When the amygdala's threat detection is quiet, the prefrontal cortex operates with greater flexibility and openness to new information. Sleep is one of the primary regulators of this balance. A well-rested brain is, structurally, a brain that feels safer, one that can think about opportunity without being hijacked by the anticipation of failure. The research on regulatory focus, developed by Tori Higgins at Columbia University, distinguishes between a promotion focus oriented toward gains and a prevention focus oriented toward avoiding losses. Both are adaptive in appropriate contexts. But chronic financial stress tends to activate and entrench the prevention focus, specifically associated with reduced openness to novel opportunities and reduced RAS sensitivity to gain-related cues. Research has shown that regulatory focus can be temporarily shifted by framing effects, by how goals are described and internally represented. The pre-sleep frame, rehearsing what to gain, or rehearsing what to protect, shapes which regulatory focus carries into the next day. Research on the neurological effects of chronic financial anxiety has documented what is called vigilance fatigue, the progressive depletion of neural resources associated with sustained threat monitoring. Studies using cortisol measurements and EEG data have shown that individuals under prolonged financial stress show elevated baseline cortisol. Paradoxically, reduced acute stress reactivity over time, as the HPA axis becomes dysregulated. This dysregulation is associated with reduced capacity for the clear, energized attention that opportunity recognition requires. Sleep, particularly uninterrupted sleep of adequate duration, is the primary mechanism by which cortisol rhythms normalize and vigilance fatigue repairs. Research on temporal self-appraisal, the way people evaluate their current self relative to their past and future selves, has shown that individuals who feel connected to a hopeful future self show better psychological outcomes and measurably different attentional profiles than those who experience continuity with a suffering past self. Studies from the University of Waterloo have documented that the degree of connection felt with one's future self activates reward-related neural circuitry in the present. A brain neurologically connected to a future version of itself, one that can feel the relevance of that future self's life, is a brain whose RAS is running a forward-looking search program. The role of narrative in shaping the brain's filtering model is more direct than cognitive science once assumed. Research by Yuri Hassan at Princeton, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, demonstrated that listening to a coherent narrative produces neural coupling, a synchronization of the listener's neural activity with that of the storyteller. The story the brain tells about itself operates with comparable power. Research on narrative identity by Dan McAdams at Northwestern has shown that individuals whose life stories include a consistent theme of redemption, difficulty, followed by growth, show better psychological resilience and different attentional patterns than those whose narratives emphasize contamination. The story is a filter specification. Research on the long-term effects of mindfulness-based interventions on attentional function has documented that 8 weeks of structured mindfulness practice produces measurable changes in both self-reported attentional, quality and neuroimaging markers of prefrontal amygdala regulation. Studies from the University of Oxford's Mindfulness Centre and replicated by multiple independent groups have shown that these changes are associated with reduced rumination and increased capacity for flexible, exploratory attention. The 8-week threshold is not magic. It is the accumulation of consistent practice across enough sleep cycles to produce durable structural change. The compounding is real, and it begins the moment the practice begins. Research on autobiographical memory has shown that the memories most accessible at any given time are not the most accurate or representative ones. They are the ones with the highest emotional salience and the most recent reinforcement. This means the story of who I am financially is maintained largely by whichever memories receive the most attentional rehearsal, deliberately directing attention toward instances of resourcefulness, effective action, and capability. Especially in the pre-sleep window, increases the accessibility of those memories and, over time, shifts the center of gravity of the autobiographical narrative. What is rehearsed becomes more available. What is more available shapes the filter. Research on sleep and emotional memory prioritization has documented that the sleeping brain does not consolidate all emotional memories equally. It shows a systematic preference for memories with goal-relevant emotional significance. Studies from Harvard's Sleep and Learning Lab have shown that individuals whose emotional memories were more strongly tied to active personal goals showed greater consolidation benefit from sleep, particularly across REM-rich late sleep cycles. When the pre-sleep mind is genuinely, emotionally engaged with a meaningful goal, not performatively, but actually, the consolidation benefit of sleep is amplified for that goal-related material. The brain works harder overnight for what the heart actually wants. The filter is not a fixed lens through which the world is seen. It is a dynamic, trainable, sleep-responsive system that takes its nightly instructions from what you bring to it. The experience of walking through the world and missing what others seem to find is not a reflection of your capacity. It is a readout of the current filter configuration, and filter configurations change. They change through intentional rehearsal, through emotional engagement with meaningful goals, through sleep, and through small, consistent practices across many nights. That is the first full statement of what these facts have been building toward. The remaining facts carry that truth not as argument, but as arrival. Every night, the ocean recedes. It pulls back from everything the day deposited on the shore, the worries, the calculations, the unanswered questions, and it carries some of them deeper, where they dissolve into something else. And then it returns. It does not return with solutions. It returns with a shifted shore, the same landscape, rearranged by forces that worked in the dark. This is what sleep does. Night after night. Not solving, rearranging. What you are carrying tonight. The financial weight. The sense of lagging behind. The quiet fear that the world yields itself to others more readily than to you. Bring it to this shore now. Let the water touch it. You do not need to resolve it. You need to let it be touched by what works in the dark. The final section is the shore the morning finds. What changes first is not the world. It is what you are able to see in it. A filter recalibrated toward availability, toward resources already present, rather than resources yet to be found. Does not require the circumstances to change before it begins working. The shift happens in the attentional layer. The same street, the same conversations, the same morning, registered differently by a brain whose RAS is now flagging what it was previously filtering out. Sleep is not a reward for the day's work. It is the infrastructure through which tomorrow's perception is built. What the brain does while the body is still, the consolidation, the emotional processing, the quiet filter recalibration is not maintenance. It is the primary work of becoming a person capable of a different kind of tomorrow. Every night of adequate sleep is an investment in what the morning will be able to see. The brain is not waiting for evidence to revise the filter. It is waiting for rehearsal. Research on neural plasticity has consistently shown that the pathway is changed by traveling it, by repeatedly activating the new pattern until it becomes the path of least resistance. The rehearsal before sleep is the traveling. Sleep is where the path gets worn deeper, and each morning that follows is the path already a little more traveled. Every time, the pre-sleep window is used with intention to bring a specific, emotionally grounded goal into the brain's consolidation process. The likelihood of that goal's related opportunities being surfaced the following day increases, not because the universe responds to intention, but because the RAS does. The filter is genuinely modified by what it is asked to find. Small, consistent asking accumulates into a different way of moving through the world. The experience of financial pressure often produces a cognitive narrowing that feels like clarity, a sharpened focus on what is immediately threatening. But this narrowing is the opposite of the perceptual breadth needed to recognize opportunity. Widening the aperture requires reducing threat load, and reducing threat load requires sleep. The path out of the tunnel is, in part, through the night. Not all the way, but far enough to see a little more of what is already there. The default mode network, that quietly active, self-referential, future simulating system, is most free during the hypnagogic transition and early sleep. The thoughts that arise in this window, before effortful control quiets them, reflect the mind's true preoccupation. What you find yourself thinking about just before sleep is diagnostic of what the filter is currently set to find. Noticing it, without judgment, is the beginning of changing it. The observation itself is the first act of recalibration. Research has shown that even the expectation of adequate sleep, the belief that one has slept well, affects next-day cognitive performance, even when actual sleep duration is held constant. Studies from Colorado College's sleep lab documented that participants told they had received above-average sleep performed better on cognitive tests than those told they had received poor sleep. Regardless of actual sleep quality, perception shapes performance. The frame brought to waking shapes the brain's opening configuration as much as the sleep itself. The brain is a machine for noticing what it expects. This is the deepest implication of predictive processing research. What is expected is what is prepared for. What is prepared for is what is seen. This is not a motivational aphorism. It is a description of how neural prediction errors are calculated. Change what the brain expects, and you change what it finds. Change what you rehearse before sleep, and you change what the brain expects come morning. Small, consistent shifts in the pre-sleep narrative. What is reviewed? What is named as good? What is held as possible? Produce small, consistent shifts in the morning's filtering. Over 66 repetitions. Those shifts become structural. Over a year of nights. The filter is a different instrument than the one you began with. The change is not dramatic. It is the kind that you notice only when you look back and realize you are standing somewhere different than where you started. The science of financial well-being, distinct from financial management, has increasingly focused on psychological factors that underlie financial behavior. Factors rooted in exactly the neural mechanisms these facts have explored. Research from the Financial Health Network has documented that financial health is more strongly predicted by behaviors and beliefs, particularly around scarcity versus abundance orientation, than by income level alone. The filter is a financial factor. It is not soft data. It is a measurable predictor of financial behavior and outcome. The body knows before the mind does. Research on interoception, the brain's sensing of internal bodily states, has shown that the felt sense of possibility, of things opening up, is a body signal that precedes conscious recognition, the RAS, connected to visceral and somatic systems, responds to changes in the body's baseline state, a body that has rested, that has been given the parasympathetic recovery adequate sleep provides, sends a different signal to the filter than a depleted one. Rest is not passive. It is an upstream input into what tomorrow notices. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is maintained, in part, by the brain's tendency to over-represent the gap and under-represent the resources available for crossing it. Research on resource neglect in clinical psychology has documented this pattern and shown it responds to structured interventions, including pre-sleep resource inventories, in which individuals deliberately enumerate available personal, social, and material resources. The filter is recalibrated by counting what is there, not by denying what is not. What you name before sleep. The brain is more likely to surface in the morning. Abundance. In the neurological sense these facts have been exploring, is not a state of having everything. It is a perceptual orientation, a filter configuration that surfaces available resources from the background of experience. It can coexist with genuine material constraint. It does not resolve that constraint, but it changes who is making decisions within it. And it changes the range of what those decisions can see. The RAS is learning from tonight, right now. As these facts settle into the pre-sleep hours, the brain is tagging this material, this particular frame, this specific reorientation toward what is available rather than what is missing, as emotionally salient content. It will carry some of this into the consolidation that follows. Tomorrow's filter is being adjusted, quietly, right now. Not all at once, but the direction has shifted. Research on sleep and the consolidation of new self-knowledge, insights about one's own patterns, beliefs, and behaviors gained through therapy, coaching, or deliberate self-reflection, has shown that sleep between a session of self-reflection and the next day's experience measurably increases the behavioral application of that insight. The insight alone is not enough. It needs a night's sleep to become operational. Tonight. These facts are the session, the night is the consolidation. And tomorrow is where that consolidation begins to move. The sense that something is possible, which precedes action, which precedes outcome, which precedes the changed circumstance, is a neurological event. It is the RAS surfacing goal-relevant information into awareness. It is the prefrontal cortex, adequately rested, running its planning circuits with sufficient resource. It is the amygdala, not dominating the signal. Possibility is not an attitude. It is a brain state. And brain states are shaped every night by what happens in the quiet. Research on what is called positive expectancy, the anticipatory belief that good outcomes are likely, has shown that it produces measurable neurochemical changes, including elevated dopamine baseline and reduced cortisol reactivity. These changes, in turn, directly influence the RAS's sensitivity to opportunity-related stimuli. Expectancy is not wishful thinking. It is an upstream neurological input to the filtering system. What the brain believes about tomorrow shapes what it is able to find there, and belief, like the filter itself, is something sleep can slowly rebuild. The work of 100 facts, of 100 walks from lived experience to scientific explanation, is the work of showing the same thing from 100 angles. That you are not broken, that the experience of missing opportunity is the experience of a filter doing what filters do, under conditions that would narrow any filter, and that the night, this particular night, and every night that follows, is a genuine opportunity to recalibrate, one quiet night at a time. Research from the field of positive psychology has documented a phenomenon called post-traumatic growth, the emergence, in some individuals who have experienced significant adversity, of increased psychological strength and expanded sense of personal possibility. The neurological mechanisms involve the reorganization of the self-model, the same reconsolidation process that sleep supports. Financial hardship, when it eventually becomes a past event, often turns out to have been a filter recalibration under demanding conditions, not because the hardship was good, but because the brain, given time and rest, found a way to update its model. The final compounding of all these facts is not an argument that needs to be won before it can work. It only needs to be heard, gently, in the window before sleep, and the brain will carry the rest forward, into the night, into the consolidation that follows, into the morning that is already being prepared. The filter is not you. It is the current configuration of a highly trainable system. You are the person who is learning to work with it. That distinction between the filter and the self feels small at first, but it opens something, and the brain, on its way to sleep, can hold that opening without needing to do anything more. What was missing was never the opportunity. What was absent was the lens configured to see it, and the lens is being recalibrated right now, quietly, in the dark, by the same brain that carried all of this to the edge of sleep. That is enough. That has always been enough. The work of one night is small. The work of a year of nights is the person who sees the world differently in the morning, who walks the same street and notices what others walk past, and who finds that what seemed like luck was always, at its root, a filter that had learned a different way of looking. You have been carrying the sense that something was missing from your way of seeing the world. Science spent 100 facts walking toward you to offer a different explanation. Not that you are doing it wrong, not that you lack what others have, but that the filter was set to the wrong frequency. And the frequency can change, one night at a time. The abundance was never somewhere else. It was in the background of every day you have already lived, waiting for the lens to find it. The brain that carries you into tomorrow has processed 100 different ways of seeing the same truth. And the truth is this: the filter is yours to recalibrate. The night is the workshop, and you have always had everything you needed to begin. There is nothing left to solve tonight. The facts have done what they came to do. Let them dissolve now, not away, but into something you carry without knowing you are carrying it. Your breath is enough, the weight of the blanket, the quiet. You are not behind. You are here. And here is exactly where the brain does its best, most invisible work. What tonight has been, beneath the science and the facts and the careful tracing of neural pathways, is something quieter than all of that. It has been a long conversation with the part of you that has carried, for longer than you would like to admit, the quiet fear that the mind you were given was not the right kind, that others had been handed something you had not, that the gap between effort and outcome was your particular shape of inadequacy. The science says otherwise, completely, and in detail. Your brain is not less capable of recognizing opportunity than any other. It is a filter that learned what to look for under conditions that asked it to prioritize survival. That was not failure. That was the brain doing exactly what it was asked to do, by the circumstances you were in. What changes now is what you ask of it. Not tonight, entirely. Not all at once, but across the quiet accumulation of nights, each one a small recalibration. The filter begins to find what was always there. The abundance was never elsewhere. It was in the background of every day, waiting for the lens to shift. You brought yourself to the edge of sleep tonight with that truth. The night will carry it the rest of the way. Psychology for sleep has been returning, across many hours, to the question of what the mind carries when it meets the world each morning. The next hour in this series follows the one that may be closest to home, how the mind learns to solve the problems it has been carrying quietly for years. That hour is waiting whenever you are ready. If something in tonight's facts landed, if the idea of a trainable filter feels like something you would like to carry further, the playlist you are in has been quietly building toward exactly that. Each video a different door into the same territory. The mind, its hidden architecture, its capacity for change. You've found your way here. One quiet tap, one sleepy soul at a time. The filter has been updated tonight, even if you cannot feel it yet. Let your breath find the pace it uses when no one is counting, the one your body already knows. Sleep carries you to where the filter does its quietest and most lasting work, to where the lens is being ground by forces that need no instruction from you. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well. Quiet searcher. The resources were never missing. You were always looking through a lens that could be cleaned. And tonight, it was. Fall asleep to gentle facts, where science meets sleep. Good night.